So, has democracy been protected or pummeled in Nigeria by today's approval by both houses of the National Assembly of President Tinubu's imposition of a state of emergency on Rivers State? Well, according to one of the main opposition leaders, Atiku Abubakar, it's starting to look like democracy has been hit for six. And when the rule of law starts to break down in a country, it can slowly tear the very fabric that holds that nation together, with the rot gradually seeping and spreading. He said Nigerians are watching with dismay the events unfolding, first at the presidency and then at the National Assembly around Rivers State. One analyst called it a perverse patriotism, where the National Assembly, an institution that is supposed to be a check and balance on the excesses of the executive branch, appears to have become merely a cooperating part of it. So how much does today's action in the National Assembly fall foul of the rule of law by, first of all, approving what many lawyers argue was unconstitutional in the first place, and secondly, delivering that approval in a manner that many legal experts believe contravened the provisions of the Constitution? How much does it represent a fundamental breach of the same Constitution that the lawmakers have sworn to protect and defend?
Conferred on it by Section 305, Subsection 2 of the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended, and approved the proclamation of state of emergency declared by Mr. President in Rivers State of Nigeria. That the declaration of the state of emergency stated in the proclamation document and the mandate of Mr. President to review, and hereby mandates the President to review and even to terminate the state of emergency at any given time, but not later than 6 months. The Senate further resolved that Section 11, Subsection 4 be invoked, providing the National Assembly the authority to set up a joint ad hoc committee of both chambers to oversight the administration of Rivers State henceforth.
And that's the president of the Nigerian Senate, Godswill Akpabio there. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the president of the Nigerian Bar Association, Afam Osigwe, who is a senior advocate of Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you so very much for having me.
What do you make of today's development in the National Assembly? The Constitution requires the concurrence of both houses, and that was how it went down, but it didn't meet the constitutional test as far as the mode of voting was concerned.
I'm somewhat reluctant to discuss what happened at the National Assembly today. First, I didn't watch it. I've not had time to watch it. I've read a few excerpts of the news of what had transpired at the National Assembly. Now, you'd wonder why I'm a bit hesitant to discuss this. And the simple answer is that our position at the Nigerian Bar Association is that the proclamation of a state of emergency in Rivers State is unconstitutional. And being unconstitutional, and also the removal or suspension of the governor, his deputy, and the sitting of the State House of Assembly, in our view, these actions are unconstitutional. And being unconstitutional, there is nothing the National Assembly can ratify, because you can't place something on nothing and expect it to stand. So procedurally too, from the news reports I've read, both chambers of National Assembly passed the same by a voice vote. To my mind, when the Constitution requires that a certain action be done by a two-thirds majority, you don't do so by a voice vote. You take physical votes and count and declare the number of persons present and the number of persons who actually voted to be sure that the constitutional requirement has been met. And I listened to that bit from, and as you tracked up to this conversation, and I heard the Senate President talk about Section 11.4. And I thought that section would have put him on inquiry whether the National Assembly can ratify the President's declaration that the governor stood suspended, like as well as his deputy and the House, because that section 11.4 he referred to has a proviso that the National Assembly cannot remove the governor or his deputy. So if we're a nation truly committed to obeying our laws, I think the laws clearly stare us in the face that there's something wrong in ratifying this resolution. And I also understand, or was made to understand, that there's a proposal to have eminent Nigerians resolve the issue. And it goes back to our position at the Bar Association, that the problems in Rivers State cannot be solved by a declaration of state of emergency. That it can be solved by having a political discourse which involves the major players whose ego have prevented them to place the people and welfare and security of Rivers State above every other person. And it's been a case of who can win, who blinks first, who can pull the contacts or the strings or whatever it takes to win, to get the other person out of power. And in the whole thing, the people don't count. So to solve this problem, I don't think the declaration of state of emergency will solve it. I think a political solution at the end of the day will be the bedrock of finding a lasting solution to the current or seemingly intractable political situation Rivers State has been embroiled in almost over 1 year.
Right. Now, two things here. One of them is the fact that some constitutional lawyers have suggested that the Constitution is rather a bit of a grey area when it comes to this, which leaves it open to interpretation and perhaps manipulation. The president, of course, has said that his hand was forced and he had to act or things could have got out of hand, and the National Assembly also felt duty-bound to support the president's course of action. What do you make of that argument?
I don't think there's any gray area. First of all, if you want to know in what circumstances state of emergency can be declared, Section 305 sets it out. And all the reasons being given, either by the president himself, if you look at it contextually, and also the address by the Attorney General of the Federation, there are political reasons. Inability of the political players in Rivers State to solve the problem, to sit down to find a solution, either pray the Supreme Court judgment or post the Supreme Court judgment. There are political issues. Explosion of pipelines, I think, is neither here nor there, because there was no sufficient time to investigate and find whether it had any correlation with the political crisis in Rivers State. And so to that extent, I do not think I will attribute that to be part of the crisis in Rivers State.
In fairness, though, sorry to interrupt you, some have argued, and I don't take positions, I'm simply reflecting the other side of the argument. Some have argued that most of us are not privy to the intelligence that the president
So then if there's an intelligence sometimes in intelligence gathering, gossip can also amount to intelligence gathering. And I'm talking about empirically provable things to show a correlation. And time should have aided us in finding this. And I concede that there may be intelligence not available to the public. But let's for a moment think that that intelligence was right. Has it met the constitutional threshold for declaration of state of emergency? And I still think not. We haven't. And if you're talking about removal, and people say there's a gray area, respectfully, there isn't. There's no gray area. You may be a subjective reason as whether in some circumstance there is the conditions for it have been met. But generally, there's no gray area. When you read Section 188 of the Constitution, it lays down on the circumstances in which a governor will cease to be a governor. And the disingenuous argument that suspension is not a removal is being clever by half. Because when you're being suspended, your occupancy of that office for that moment is terminated.
Well, you can't perform your duties. You can't perform.
It's a removal. It may be short-lived, but it's a removal.
Indeed.
And for any person to argue otherwise would amount to standing logic on his head. That's a removal for a start. And if Section 188 did not include a situation of state of emergency as one of the periods that a governor can be removed, then there's no gray area. If you also go to Section 11 of the Constitution as what could be done when a state of emergency is declared, it also shows you that the removal of governor under Section 11.4 is not one of the things that is contemplated. So there's no gray area. If you also look at Section 11.2, I think, or 11.3, it talks about the State House of Assembly being able to make law concurrently with the National Assembly in a period of emergency. And if I may ask a converse question, does it mean that when a national president proclaims a national emergency in the whole federation, that his office is also declared vacant or can be declared vacant? That's not it. The emergency simply means that the president may take extraordinary measures to resolve the issue
Right,
that have
to
presented the state
intervene
of, to
directly.
intervene.
Right.
So it is the mode of intervention.
But not
It does
to upset
exist-
the democratic
not at all.
institutions
It is
there.
not to dismantle
Right.
democratic bodies or persons who have been duly elected into that office. Otherwise, a president can turn a dictator overnight, and at every whim, any little drop, any little provocation, he will say that a state of emergency situation has
And
arisen.
that's a very important point that you raised.
That is the
Yeah.
frightening thing about Rivers State.
That is a very important point that you raise there. The potential for abuse.
For abuse.
And the potential for excesses. But is it possible that this situation in Rivers State is so complex that perhaps you have two competing explanations that are both true? In other words, you potentially have the threat of a reconstituted militancy in the region, and I say that with some reservation because I don't have the facts in front of me, except based on what the president was suggesting. But at the same time, it's impossible to divorce the president's action and the subsequent National Assembly reaction from its constitutional shortcomings, which is where that gray area comes in.
So I'll say this to you. If you look at the Nigerian democracies in 1999, no National Assembly has withheld assent to a president's declaration of state of emergency. So I see the legislature has come to accept that when the president exercises that prerogative of declaring a state of emergency, rightly or wrongly, that they are duty bound to ratify it. So that may not be a good guide about it. And if they are talking about insurgency, militancy, and all that, there are possibilities. The point is, as at the time of the declaration, have the insurgency or militants risen or given room to believe that it will so rise as to create an immediate danger?
Right. And in a clearly empirical way.
Yes. You see, the combatants in the Rivers State issue are known. And I think not adequate effort was made to bring them to the table to resolve these issues. Despite the Supreme Court judgment, I insist, parties could have sat down and found solutions that work if they had placed the people of Rivers State above every other thing. If it was not about their ego, it was not about who wins and who loses, and who has to hide his head in shame to say, I told you I'll deal with you. It was a big ego fight. It was not about the people. And if the people had been at the center of the whole issue, we won't get to this point. We will not get to this. So we are using exercise of constitutional power to cure a political a situation that two individuals were driving and refusing to sit down to find a solution to. Anything other than that, I'm unable to agree.
Well, let me move it in this direction and see what you think about it. I mean, there are those who say that this is all about doing everything to ensure that some form of control is maintained over an important swing state like Rivers as 2027 draws near.
I may not want to go that far, but I want to say about political control in Rivers State. Who called the shots? Whether it has any bearing to do with the future election is something I'm not able to conjecture. I would want to concern myself with control of the levers of power within the state. How it affects national politics, I may not be able to go into, and I will leave the politicians to talk about that. I speak as a lawyer. The legal effects of actions, the legal justification or the wise of actions taken, and how the Constitution, and how to situate the actions taken within the context of the Constitution to justify, to find a justification for them, to see if there's any constitutional hanger on which we can hang this action to say, yes, under the Constitution, these actions can be carried out.
But looking at those legal effects that you're talking about, do you think that the president can achieve what he wants to achieve in Rivers State, which is peace, through the imposition of a state of emergency? In other words, can he bring the governor and the minister to heel, as well as the restive elements in the state that he cited, by unleashing the might of the federal government on Rivers State? What is your assessment?
Growing up, I was taught that you can force a horse to the stream, you can't make it to drink water. You don't impose peace on people. When you impose peace on people, you may obtain peace of the graveyard. And as a friend of mine used to remind us back there in the university, he said that peace does not mean the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. What the Rivers needs is justice. How to bring this about, I may not be able to sit down here and tell you. But I will tell you, and I insist, bury the ego, place the people first, place the state first, and you find a solution. And I think the president has enough capacity and commands enough respect to be able to achieve. He can put his feet down and not favor one person against the other and treat every person with a view to finding a solution that works for the people. I'm sure that peace is realizable. The state of emergency as it is will not be able to achieve that, in my opinion. I mean, there may be... I spoke with some NBA branch chairman in Port Harcourt. They say that everywhere is quiet. That's kind of an air of I don't know. I'm trying to find the right word to. You know what? Like uncertainty. People are afraid of what would happen. The courts didn't sit yesterday. They sat today. People are unsure.
And of course,
what may happen.
Yes.
So it's as if people are a bit withdrawn, studying the situation.
Yes.
But I pray that there is no eruption.
But ultimately, this comes. Even if there is no eruption, which we all hope there won't be.
There won't be, by God's grace.
All this comes at a cost to the people of Rivers State, doesn't it? Most of whom have nothing to do with this fight between Wike and Fubara.
There's that African saying that when two elephants fight, the grass suffer. While two political gladiators fight, it is the people that fight. I'm assuming the allocation of Rivers State is not released to it. I've read that it will be released or it has been released. It is the civil servants who have no dog in the fight, who will go home without their salary at the end of the month. It's the people who have to benefit from the social services that the government is supposed to take care of with the allocation that will suffer.
And possibly the inconvenience of sort of military people and all kinds of things all over the place. They have nothing to do with it,
but they will have to suffer it. And the big men are sufficiently provided for that. They will not even know that the revenue has not been released. So the people will suffer, of course.
Yeah,
and that's unfortunate, because
we
shouldn't have got to the stage where an order of court will be made that allocation should not be released unless budget is presented, and then budget could not be presented.
Well, you are, of course, the president of the Nigerian Bar Association, which is a very well-respected position and one that has been engaged in a form of, if you like, legal activism over the years. What other dynamic do you see coming into play now to try and right these apparent constitutional infractions which look as if they're going to stand? Is the Nigerian Bar Association considering, for instance, taking any sort of legal action? Well,
there's so many options that could be considered in this circumstance.
Yeah, but which ones are you considering?
Well, that's the one I'm going to talk about. Being part of finding solutions to this, either between the federal government and the state or the stakeholders. And litigation is also an option. But we give room for mediation to thrive, and then also not ruling out that litigation may be resorted to find a legal interpretation to it. But legal interpretations sometimes don't give justice. The issue of who constituted the House of Assembly in Rivers State, constitutional validity of actions by the governor were taken up to the Supreme Court and judgment given. But it did not bring succor to the people. It didn't solve a problem. So we realize that litigation may not always solve problems. So we would like to be part of any solution, any process that bets a solution that returns peace to Rivers State.
Well, you've made the point here, and I think a lot of people would agree with your assessments, that the position that was taken seems to favor one side and not the other. If you were to advise the now suspended Governor Sim Fubara, what would your advice to him be? Roll over and take it on the chin?
I would leave that to his advisors and his lawyers to advise him, and I'm not one of them. But whatever action any of the parties take, whether you feel you've lost out or whether you have won, remember that at the end of the day, it is the collective interest of Rivers people that counts most and should be uppermost on the mind of every person. There should be no form of triumphalism. The balance in Rivers State is a little bit shaken, both ethnic and political, and every party should behave in such a manner as not to tip the balance so that peace and stability will be maintained. But whatever action everybody takes should be to de-escalate the tension and ensure that normalcy returns to Rivers, and that whatever solution anybody intends to apply will be such as to make for an orderly society.
But I mean, he is a defender of the Constitution. His constitutional rights, from what you have said, have been violated. I mean, what would you advise him to do in those circumstances?
I am not his lawyer and insists. It's up to him. Some people can say, well, my rights have been violated, but I leave it, I forgive them. I don't know whether he's that kind of person. Some say, no, a wrong has been done here, I must fight to get a redress. It is for him and his team of advisors and lawyers to appraise the situation.
Yeah, but
and
wouldn't
take a
it be
decision.
important in setting a constitutional judicial precedent
Speaking normally, that would be the expected thing to do. But whether he decides to do that or not will be up to him. And I can't advise him on the course of action to take.
But obviously, you can take action yourself. I mean,
well, we appraise that because there's an issue called local
standing.
standing. We look for a decide on litigation. We
Right.
ensure that those who will stand in for us are people who have locus and can sustain an action in courts.
Looking at everything that has happened, which you have methodically gone through here, as you would, I mean, you're a senior advocate of Nigeria. You understand the Constitution. You understand the law. You understand the rule of law within a democracy. Would it be fair to say that democracy, rather than being protected, has been pummeled in Nigeria as a result of what has happened?
My take is for every time there are constitutional infractions, democracy takes a hit. For every time we do things not in accordance with the rule of law and due process of law.
How big a hit?
The government takes a hit. How big that hit depends on its impact and how it portrays us in the eyes of the international community. And I think this doesn't make us look good. It's quite a hit.
On that note, I want to thank you very much indeed, and to say we're deeply grateful to you to have taken time in what was clearly a busy day for you to come here and talk to us. Afam Osigwe is the president of the Nigerian Bar Association. He's also a senior advocate of Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed. Good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.